For 20 years, my parents acted like I had died. No birthday calls. No holiday cards. No accidental run-ins. No asking about school, work, marriage, health, or whether I was even still alive. They erased me so completely that by the time I was in my 30s, I had stopped thinking of myself as their son. I was just the mistake they had edited out of the family portrait. Then one Saturday afternoon, my cousin Melissa posted a photo online. It was supposed to be harmless. She had come by my house after a small scholarship event my son and I hosted in honor of my grandmother. We were standing in the driveway smiling like normal people do when the day has gone well. Behind us, you could see part of the house. The stone front steps. The black shutters. The clean landscaping. And off to the side, parked near the garage, you could clearly see my Porsche. Melissa captioned it with something casual and stupid. Something like, "So proud of my cousin Dino." Grandma Edith would have loved this. That photo stayed up for less than an hour before it changed my life. 43 minutes after she posted it, my phone rang. I was in the kitchen rinsing coffee cups when I heard it vibrating on the counter. I glanced down and saw a number I had not seen in 2 decades, but some pains never leave the body. You do not forget the sound of a deadbolt clicking behind you. You do not forget the number attached to the voice that told you your life was over. It was my father. The last time he had called me his son, I was 16 years old, standing in a freezing rainstorm with a newborn baby in my arms. I stared at the screen and let it ring twice. 3 times. 4. I should have let it go to voicemail. Any sane person would have. But I had spent years in courtrooms and conference rooms learning one rule that never failed me: when somebody who ignored you for years suddenly wants your attention, do not interrupt them. Let them tell you why. So I answered, and I said nothing. There was a short pause on the other end, the kind of pause people take when they expect you to fill the silence for them. I didn't. Then my father cleared his throat. "Dino," he said, as if he had spoken to me last week. Long time. That was how it started. Not with "I'm sorry." Not with "How have you been?" Not with "I heard about your grandmother." Not with "I should have called years ago." Just long time. I looked through my kitchen window at the backyard my son had mowed that morning. The grass was bright and neat in the late sun. On the patio table there were still paper cups and folded chairs from the scholarship reception. Inside the house, everything was quiet. Safe. Earned. Mine. And on the phone, the man who had once thrown me out into the dark had finally remembered I existed because he saw a photograph of a house and a car. That told me everything before he said another word. "You saw the post," I said. He gave a soft laugh, too light for the moment. "Your mother and I were surprised. You seem to be doing well." There it was. Not concern. Inventory. A house. A car. Evidence. Proof that the son they buried in their minds had become someone worth calling. That was the moment I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My parents had never forgotten me. Not really. Forgetting would have required indifference. What they had done was worse. They had stored me away. Archived me. Labeled me as shame. And the second success made me visible, they came looking not for me, but for what they thought they could still take. Before I tell you what they wanted from me, and why that phone call ended with my father gasping for breath in a courthouse hallway, you need to understand what happened the night he decided I was disposable. I was 16 years old when my life split into a before and an after. It was late October. Cold enough that the evening air already smelled metallic, like wet pavement and leaf rot. I was a junior in high school. At that age, your problems are supposed to be small. A test on Friday. A coach who doesn't like you. A girl who takes too long to text back. Whether you can save enough from a part-time job to buy a car that starts in the winter. I thought my life was still made of normal teenage worries. Then the doorbell rang. My parents were in the living room. My father was in his usual chair reading a business magazine. My mother had one ankle crossed over the other, half watching some home renovation show and half scrolling through neighborhood committee emails on her tablet. My older brother Julian was stretched out on the couch like he owned it, one arm over the back cushion, grinning at something on his phone. Julian was the axis our family rotated around. If my parents had a religion, it was appearances, and Julian was their proof that God loved them. He was tall, polished, athletic, easy with adults, excellent at saying exactly what teachers and coaches wanted to hear. He got good grades without seeming to try. He could put on a blazer and look like he had been born in one. At family events, people would clap him on the shoulder and tell my parents they must be proud. They loved hearing that more than they loved breathing. I was not Julian. I was quieter. More internal. Less useful in photographs. So when the bell rang, nobody moved except me. I opened the door and found Sarah standing there on the porch. She looked wrong before I understood why. Too pale. Lips colorless. Hair damp and pulled back badly, like she had done it in a hurry. Her eyes were swollen. In her arms she was holding a thick bundle of hospital blankets. For 1 second, my brain refused to catch up. Then she lifted the bundle toward me, and I saw a tiny face. A baby. My baby. Sarah's mouth was trembling so hard the words almost fell apart before they reached me. She said she couldn't do it. She said her parents were sending her away to her aunt's place in another state. She said she was sorry. She said she had nowhere else to go, nowhere else to leave him, nowhere else to put this terrible, impossible future. Then she placed the baby in my arms. I still remember the weight of him. Not heavy. That was the shocking part. He was terrifying because he was light. He felt breakable. Warm, but tiny. I could smell baby powder and something sharp and clean from the hospital blankets. He made a small sound in his sleep and moved his mouth, and I knew in the strangest, clearest way of my life that whatever happened next, I was not putting him down and walking away. Sarah didn't come inside. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just cried once, like a sound had escaped her by force, and hurried back down the walkway toward a car idling at the curb. I watched her go. Then I turned and carried my son into the living room. The room went silent so fast it felt staged. My father lowered the magazine. My mother looked first at me, then at the baby, then at me again, like she was waiting for the punchline. Julian sat up a little. He was amused at first, the way people are amused when they think they are about to witness somebody else's public embarrassment. I stood between the coffee table and the television and said the only thing I could think to say. This is my son. Nobody moved. I explained as much as I knew. Sarah. Hidden pregnancy. Panic. Hospital. She left him here. I said it badly, because I was 16 and shaking and trying not to hold the baby too tight. I kept looking at my mother, expecting her face to soften at the sight of her grandson. I kept waiting for one of them to stand up. Nobody did. My father was the first to speak. He did not ask the baby's name. He did not ask whether Sarah was safe. He did not ask whether I had eaten, slept, or understood what was happening. He looked at the bundle in my arms with open disgust and said, "You're calling the state in the morning." Just like that. As if he were telling me to return a damaged package. I stared at him, not understanding. He set his magazine down carefully on the glass table, the way he did when he was about to talk business, and repeated himself. Slower this time. The authorities. Child Protective Services. Emergency intake. Somewhere this situation could be handled quietly before it became public. Quietly. That word told me more than the rest. He wasn't panicked because I was 16 with a newborn. He was panicked because people might find out. My mother stood up, but not to help. She smoothed the front of her slacks, turned, and walked down the hall toward my bedroom. I actually felt relief for half a second. I thought she was getting blankets. Or towels. Or anything that mothers get when a baby arrives in chaos. I followed her and stopped in the doorway just in time to see her pull my old canvas suitcase from the top shelf of my closet. Not for the baby. For me. She unzipped it, grabbed armfuls of clothes, and shoved them inside. No folding. No talking. Just efficient removal, like I was being cleared out before I could stay in the house by staying in it. I asked what she was doing. She didn't answer. I asked again, louder. Still nothing. The wheels of the suitcase rattled across the hardwood as she dragged it back to the front door. She set it down there and stepped away from it like the job was done. When I turned back toward the living room, my father was already waiting. He came close enough that I could smell his aftershave and the scotch he had been drinking. He kept his voice low, which made it worse. He said I had one chance. Give the baby up in the morning, stay in the house, and we would never speak of this again. Or keep the baby and leave immediately. He told me I was not going to destroy Julian's future because of one disgusting mistake. I remember looking at Julian when he said that. My brother did not even pretend to be uncomfortable. He just sat there, elbow on the leather armrest, watching me with that smug, distant expression people wear when they believe somebody else deserves pain. I looked down at the baby. He was asleep again. His face was red and soft and completely unaware that his entire existence had just been put on trial by people who shared my blood. Something changed in me then. Not courage, exactly. Courage sounds noble. It was more primitive than that. More immediate. Like a wire had touched fire. I realized I could survive being unloved. What I could not survive was becoming the kind of man who handed a child away because stronger people told him to. So I picked up the suitcase with my free hand. My father's face hardened. If you walk out that door, you are dead to me. I believed him. That is the reason I opened it anyway. The rain hit me almost instantly. Hard, cold, slanting rain driven by wind. The porch light spilled over the steps in a weak yellow square. Somewhere behind me, the front door shut. A second later I heard the deadbolt slide into place. That sound stayed with me for 20 years. I stood there for a few seconds because my body had not yet accepted that this was really happening. Then the baby stirred against my chest and made a small hungry cry, and reality caught up. I was outside. I had no car. No cash worth mentioning. A cheap phone with almost no battery. A suitcase. A newborn. And nowhere to go except one place. My grandmother Edith lived across town in a small one-story house my parents called depressing because it was old and plain and had no impressive landscaping to show off. My father rarely visited unless a holiday required him to perform sonhood for an hour. My mother disliked her because Edith never played the social games that made people like Eleanor feel powerful. Julian tolerated her the way polished people tolerate inconvenient relatives. But I loved her. Not because she spoiled me. She didn't. Because she paid attention. She would ask questions and then wait for the real answer. She could tell when I was lying about being fine. She never mistook silence for emptiness. So I started walking. That night is one long cold blur in my memory. My shoes filled with water so fast they made a squishing sound with every step. The baby, my son, was tucked inside my jacket as much as I could manage. Every time headlights came near, I turned my body to block the rain from his face. At red lights I bounced him slightly because I thought maybe babies stopped crying if you did that. My arms ached. My teeth were chattering so hard I could barely think. Twice I almost turned around. Not because I thought my parents would take me back. They had made that clear. But because the distance between disaster and nowhere is very long when you're 16. Still, I kept moving. By the time I reached Edith Street, my fingers were numb and I was shaking so badly I almost missed the first step to her porch. Her house looked exactly the same as it always had, modest siding, an old storm door, one porch light, a flower pot she forgot to bring in every winter. To anybody else it would have looked small. To me it looked like the last lit place in the world. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked harder. Then the porch light clicked on, and a few seconds later the door opened. Edith stood there in a faded robe and thick socks, her white hair pinned back loosely. She took in the whole picture in one glance. My face. The baby. The suitcase. The rainwater pooling around my shoes. She did not say, "What have you done?" She did not say, "How could you be so irresponsible?" She did not say, "I'm too old for this." She reached for my arm and said, "Get inside before that child catches cold." That was it. Not an interrogation. A decision. Inside, the house smelled like tea and cedar and whatever soup she had made earlier that evening. She shut the door against the storm, disappeared into the hall closet, came back with towels, and handed me one while she took another and carefully patted the rain off the blankets around the baby. "What's his name?" she asked. I swallowed and said, "Noah." She nodded once, as if accepting him into the world required nothing more than that. "All right. We'll feed Noah. Then you can tell me the rest." We. That word saved my life. I gave her the messy version first. Sarah. The baby. My parents. The ultimatum. The lock clicking behind me. Edith listened without interrupting. Her face did not change much while I spoke, but I knew her well enough to see the anger gathering behind her eyes. Not loud anger. Not theatrical anger. The kind that gets very still. When I finished, I started apologizing. For the baby. For the hour. For ruining her peace. For arriving with disaster wrapped in hospital blankets. She held up a hand and stopped me. "Did you leave that child?" she asked. "No." "Did you ask them to help?" "Yes." "And they put you out?" I nodded. She looked toward the window where rain was still striking the glass and said, mostly to herself, "Then I know everything I need to know." At dawn she drove to the store. I heard her old car back out of the driveway while I sat awake in the spare room staring at Noah in a laundry basket lined with towels because we did not have a crib yet. 2 hours later she came home with formula, diapers, baby clothes, bottles, a used crib she had convinced someone to load into the trunk, and a package of cheap onesies. She assembled the crib herself on the living room rug because her hands were steadier than mine. Every now and then she would pause to read the instructions, then mutter that modern people made simple things too complicated. When I tried to apologize again, tears already burning behind my eyes, she tightened one screw, looked up at me, and said, "Dino, stop saying sorry like you did something shameful by keeping your son." No one had said anything kind to me in so many hours that hearing that almost broke me open. I did not go back to school in person after that. I finished what I could online, then moved into a GED program because diapers do not wait for graduation. I needed work immediately. I got a job at a diner off the highway washing dishes for a man named Joe who looked like he had been carved out of old meat and bad luck. He was thick around the middle, rough in the voice, and not interested in anybody's excuses. But he paid on time, fed me at the end of the shift, and after the first week he stopped looking at me like I might disappear. The work was brutal. Steam, grease, bleach, knives dropped into cloudy water, stacks of plates that never ended. I would come home smelling like fryer oil and industrial soap with my wrists aching and my back hot with pain. Some nights my hands were so raw I had to hold the bottle differently when I fed Noah because the formula powder stung the cracks in my skin. Edith never once called me a burden. When I came in after midnight, She would usually be waiting at the kitchen table in her robe with one lamp on and a plate covered in foil. Meatloaf. Soup. Toast. Whatever she had saved. Sometimes she had Noah asleep in her arms. Sometimes he was already in the crib. Sometimes he woke up the second he heard my voice, and I would stand there exhausted to the bone with this tiny person blinking up at me like I was the one stable thing in his world. That kind of trust changes you. I did not become better because I was naturally strong. I became better because a baby looked at me like I had to be. The first year was survival. The second year was routine. By the third, something more dangerous grew inside me. Not anger. Hunger. I did not want Noah to inherit my panic. I did not want him to grow up hearing the same insults in a smaller house. I did not want his life shaped by the night my parents chose their reputation over me. So I kept going. I studied after shifts. Community college first. Then transfer work. Then law school, which seemed ridiculous when I said it out loud and even more ridiculous when I tried to pay for it. There were years when my life shrank to 4 locations: the diner, the classroom, Edith's kitchen table, and Noah's room. People hear a story like mine and imagine one inspirational montage. They imagine determination as a clean thing. It isn't. It is ugly. It is repetitive. It is sitting under cheap yellow light with your feet throbbing inside worn shoes while your child sleeps in the next room and your grandmother pretends not to notice you crying over a tuition bill. It is reading case law at 2 in the morning until the words stop meaning anything. It is sleeping for 90 minutes and calling that enough. It is using coupons, fixing old appliances instead of replacing them, and learning the exact day the electric bill is due because there is no room for mistakes. There was a blanket Edith kept folded in the linen closet. Gray, heavy, rough at the edges from age. During law school I fell asleep at the kitchen table more times than I can count. Constitutional law open under one hand, a highlighter on the floor, notes smeared where I had drooled onto them from exhaustion. Every time I woke up in the dark, that gray blanket would be over my shoulders and there would be a fresh mug of tea beside me. She never made a speech about sacrifice. She never stood over me and said she believed in me. She just made sure I stayed warm enough to continue. That was Edith's way. She did not perform love. She practiced it. Noah grew up in the middle of all this, and the miracle of him was that he did not grow bitter. He should have, maybe. He had every reason. His mother was gone. His grandparents on my side acted like he was a stain on the family record. Our early years were tight and tense and tired. But he grew into one of those rare people who make gentleness look strong. He used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I studied. Sometimes he would push one of my casebooks toward me and say, with perfect seriousness, "You forgot this part." He could not have been more than 7 the first time he did it. Edith laughed so hard she had to take off her glasses. When he was 10, he started making tea if he saw either one of us looking too tired. When he was 13, he learned how to do laundry without being asked. When he was 15, he found out the truth about my parents. I had not planned to tell him that young. I wanted to wait. I wanted to preserve whatever simple idea of family he still had. But children are not fooled by missing branches in a family tree forever. It happened after a school assignment. He had to make a basic family chart. Grandparents, parents, siblings, cousins. He came home with the paper folded in half and set it on the table between us. "Dad," he asked, "why don't they want us?" There are questions no parent is prepared for, no matter how long he sees them coming. I could have lied. I could have said it was complicated. Adults do that because they think vagueness protects children. But I remembered what it felt like to live inside other people's lies. So I told him the truth in words he could hold. I told him that some people love image more than reality. I told him that some people only know how to love what makes them look good. I told him none of that had anything to do with his worth. Then I told him the part that mattered most. When they rejected me, they rejected the best thing that ever happened to me. He cried quietly, not loudly. That hurt more to watch. Edith came over, pulled him against her side, and said, "A person can be related to you and still fail to be family." That line stayed with all of us. By the time I passed the bar and started at the district attorney's office, the house had changed in the small ways lives do when hope enters them. New curtains. Fewer patched towels. Better groceries. A repaired porch rail. We were never flashy. After growing up in a home obsessed with display, I learned to distrust surfaces that worked too hard. I did, however, learn to appreciate solidity. A decent suit. Reliable brakes. Good shoes. A front door that locked because you lived there, not because someone wanted you out. My career took shape slowly and then all at once. I was good in court. Better than I expected to be. Some people mistake quiet for weakness until it starts asking precise questions in public. I prepared hard, spoke cleanly, and did not bluff. Judges noticed. Opposing counsel noticed. Eventually, I became the man younger prosecutors came to before trial when they needed somebody to look at a file and tell them where the lie was hiding. During all those years, my parents never reached out. Not when I graduated. Not when I got sworn in. Not when Noah made honor roll. Not when Edith got sick the first time. Not when she got worse the second. Time did what time always does. It revealed character and then collected a price. Edith grew smaller as Noah grew taller. Her hands began to tremble some mornings. She moved slower between the stove and the table. She forgot names once in a while, though never the important ones. Noah became her shadow. He carried groceries. Checked her pills. Drove when I was stuck late at work. Read to her on the porch because she said his voice made long books feel shorter. Watching those two together healed something in me my parents had broken. Because Noah never had to be told what she had done for us. He understood it the way people understand weather when they live inside it. Her love was the house we had all been living in for years. She died on a Sunday morning just after dawn. Peacefully, the doctor said. As if peace can soften the fact that the person who taught you survival is no longer in the next room. We buried her 3 days later. A small service. Quiet. Real. Joe from the diner came with a cane and a tie that looked borrowed. 2 of Edith's neighbors brought casseroles nobody touched. Noah stood beside me in a dark suit and read a short passage about loyalty that nearly ended me. My parents did not come. Not a flower. Not a card. Not even the kind of performative message people send when they want credit for minimal decency. Nothing. I thought that silence would remain final. Then Melissa posted the photo. Here is what my parents saw in that image. They saw a clean, well-kept house. They saw my son standing straight in a suit. They saw my arm around him. They saw the driveway. And they saw the Porsche. I should explain the car, because people hear that word and make assumptions. It was not some cartoon symbol of vanity. I bought it used, after years of doing everything the slow way, after the mortgage was stable, after Noah's education fund was secure, after I could afford something once in my life without apologizing to myself for it. It was the first thing I ever purchased because I wanted it, not because I needed it. That mattered more than the badge on the hood. To me, the car meant I had finally escaped survival mode. To my parents, it meant I had assets. That first phone call lasted less than 4 minutes. My father started with fake warmth, moved to curiosity, then to cautious probing. Where exactly was the house located? Had I bought it recently? How had the market treated me? Was the scholarship event something charitable or was it connected to the estate? That last word arrived too casually to be accidental. The estate. So they already knew something. Not everything, but enough. I asked what he wanted. He paused, then did what people like him always do when the mask slips. He stopped pretending the call was about reconciliation and turned it into a transaction. He said there were family matters to discuss. He said my mother had been thinking a lot lately. He said now that we're all older, maybe it was time to handle things the right way. Then he said the line I will never forget. Whatever your grandmother left behind should be dealt with fairly. Fairly. My hand tightened around the phone. Edith had barely been in the ground a week. He had not called to ask how she died. He had not called to ask whether she suffered. He had not called to say goodbye to the woman who raised him. But the second he saw visible evidence that her house still stood, and her grandson did not look poor enough to dismiss, he found the energy to speak. I told him I was not discussing Edith with a man who had not visited her unless Christmas demanded witnesses. He inhaled sharply. The pleasant tone vanished. He said he had every right to know what was happening with his mother's property. He said certain assets had family origin. He said Julian was reviewing some old records and there might be legal complications if I tried to move too quickly. Julian. Of course. The golden child had entered the chat. I told my father that if he had legal questions, he could direct them to attorney Robert Sterling, Edith's estate lawyer. Then I ended the call. 10 minutes later, my mother texted me for the first time in 20 years. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have called. Just, we need to talk before this gets ugly. That was my mother in one sentence. Threat wearing the perfume of reason. The next day, Melissa called me in a panic. She said she had taken the photo down. She said Aunt Martha had seen it, then Julian, then my parents. She said the family group chat had exploded. She sounded guilty, and honestly, she should have. But I wasn't angry with her. She had not caused the greed. She had only turned on the light. 2 days later I met with Sterling. He had handled Edith's legal affairs for years and was one of those old-school attorneys whose office smelled like dust, leather, and patience. He was already irritated when I walked in. He held up a hand before I even sat down. Your father's lawyer called me this morning, he said. That sentence told me the game had advanced faster than expected. Sterling slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of the trust documents, deed records, correspondence, and notes Edith had left him over the years. I had known in broad terms that she had protected the house. I did not yet know how thoroughly. She had created a private trust years earlier. Not extravagant, not reckless, but substantial. The house was secured. Investments had grown quietly. Designated distributions were clear. Her intent, according to every document that mattered, was unmistakable. What she built was for me and Noah. Not Arthur. Not Eleanor. Not Julian. Me and Noah. Sterling removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Your grandmother anticipated trouble, he said. She documented everything. Then he gave a tired little smile that carried more admiration than humor. She knew her son. Hearing that hurt in a way I didn't expect. Because even in preparing for death, Edith had spent time protecting us from the people who should have protected us first. Sterling continued. Arthur's attorney was threatening to contest the trust. Undue influence. Questionable capacity. Family origin asset claims. The usual ugly toolkit when greed dresses itself as principle. I asked whether they had any chance. Not on the law, he said. But people file ugly cases all the time. The goal isn't always to win. Sometimes the goal is to pressure, delay, embarrass, and force a settlement. That made sense. My parents had used pressure all their lives. Public pressure. Family pressure. Social pressure. Shame. Silence. Threat. They were not people who built. They were people who cornered. So I asked the real question. Why now? Sterling leaned back. Because they think there's enough money to make this worth the attempt. He was right, but it still wasn't enough for me. Desperation has texture. I know it when I see it. And something about the speed of their move told me this wasn't just greed. It was urgency. At work, I had a friend named Marcus in financial investigations. Good at paper trails. Better at reading what panic looks like when it's hiding behind luxury. I brought him coffee, closed my office door, and gave him Julian's information. Public records only, I said. He grinned. The fun kind. 3 days later he came back with a folder and a face that said I was going to enjoy this. Julian's life was a stage set. The apartment downtown? Leased beyond reason. The designer watch? Financed. The startup he had bragged about at family gatherings? Dead. The crypto plays he'd been making after that collapse? Worse than dead. Then came the jewel on top of the stupidity pile, a Porsche 911, recently financed at a rate that would have made a loan shark blush. That car explained the urgency. The family that had called me irresponsible at 16 was now sprinting toward a courtroom because their chosen son could not afford the lifestyle he had built to impress the same people they had spent years trying to impress. And here was the part that made me physically ill. Based on the debt timing, they had probably seen Melissa's photo of my driveway, seen my Porsche, and assumed I was sitting on liquid money they could reach. They had not called because they missed me. They had called because they thought the son they abandoned had finally become profitable. Once I knew that, my anger changed shape. It got colder. Cold anger is useful. It does not wave its arms. It organizes. Over the next 2 weeks, Sterling and I prepared for war. He handled the probate side. I handled strategy, records, chronology, potential attack lines, contradictions, and how to make the truth impossible to muddy. We gathered everything. Medical evaluations proving Edith was competent. Deposit records. Property sale histories. Her handwritten notes. The original deed chain. Copies of correspondence she had sent Sterling after holidays, after Arthur disappointed her again, after Noah's graduations, after each quiet year in which she kept building a future for the people who had actually stayed. In one of those letters, she wrote something I read 3 times before I could put it down. Arthur confuses blood with duty. Dino never did. That was Edith in 12 words. Noah watched all of this without asking me to protect him from it. He was in pre-med by then, serious and calm and carrying Edith's steadiness like an inheritance inside his bones. One night while I was reviewing documents at the kitchen table, he sat across from me and said, "If they're coming now, it means they never changed." "No," I said. "It means success made them curious." He nodded slowly. "That's worse." He was right. Real hatred is obvious. Conditional recognition is crueler, because it tries to rewrite the past while keeping the benefits of what it did to you. A week before the hearing, my father called again. This time I answered immediately. He skipped the small talk. He said his attorney had advised him to make one final family-minded attempt before filing additional motions. He said nobody wanted a public dispute. He said my mother was under great stress. He said Julian had temporary financial complications that the family needed to solve together. He said if I agreed to transfer a large portion of the trust into a jointly managed account, we could avoid unnecessary damage. I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. He went silent. Then he said, with the old menace sharpening under the words, "You always did confuse defiance with strength." That line took me straight back to the rain. I said, "And you always confused control with fatherhood." He hung up on me. The morning of the hearing was bright in the most offensive way. Blue sky, clean light, the kind of weather that makes ugly things feel even uglier because the world itself looks innocent. I dressed carefully. Navy suit. White shirt. Dark tie. Not vanity. Armor. When I came downstairs, Noah was already in the kitchen in a charcoal suit. Pouring coffee like this was a normal day and not the collision of 20 years of silence, greed, and cowardice. You don't have to come, I said. He looked up. I know. He picked up his cup and added, I'm still coming. On the drive downtown, neither of us said much. We didn't need to. Some days language is less useful than presence. The courthouse felt the way it always did, polished stone, filtered air, fluorescent steadiness, security lines, people trying on confidence that didn't fit. I knew the building well enough that my body shifted into work mode the second I stepped inside. That helped. Familiar structures calm old fear. As we reached the probate wing, I saw them. Arthur. Eleanor. Julian. And their attorney. My father looked older, but not softer. Time had thinned his hair and sharpened the hollows around his mouth, but his stance was unchanged. Chest out. Chin lifted. Still wearing authority like a costume tailored 20 years ago and never updated. My mother was dressed beautifully, of course. Cream blouse. Precise jewelry. Hair arranged as if grief, greed, and vanity could all be managed with enough salon discipline. Julian looked expensive and exhausted. There are people whose lives begin leaking through the seams no matter how much they spend. He was one of them. Perfect shoes, tired eyes. Nice watch, nervous hands. Good suit, bad skin. He kept checking his phone the way debtors do when every vibration might be another crack in the wall. Their attorney, Vance, was already talking with the kind of oily confidence some litigators mistake for intelligence. I knew the type. Loud with weak facts. Dangerous only if the other side is scared. When my father saw me, he smiled. It took effort not to smile back, because people often mistake calm for invitation. I was calm because I had already won the moral case. The legal one just needed paperwork. He stepped toward me, hands spread slightly, performing reunion for the empty hallway. Dino, he said. You look well. There is no phrase more insulting from the wrong mouth. I did not answer. His eyes shifted to Noah. And this must be my son, I said. Noah held his gaze without offering a hand. For one brief second, my mother's expression changed. Not into warmth. Into calculation. She was measuring him. Trying to find herself in his face. Trying to decide whether blood had produced anything she could claim now that he was standing upright in a suit instead of wrapped in blankets at the edge of her carpet 20 years earlier. Julian tried on a smile and failed. Vance stepped in, extending a hand. Counsel for the family. I looked at his hand and then at him until he lowered it. Noted, I said. He gave a laugh that wanted to sound amused and only sounded thirsty. There's still time to handle this privately. My family had 20 years to handle things privately, I said. They chose silence. His smile thinned. Good. Inside the courtroom, the air felt cooler. Cleaner. Less forgiving. Sterling was already at our table, files arranged in exact stacks. He gave me one look and knew from my face that the hallway had gone exactly as expected. The hearing began. Vance made the first move. He was theatrical, I'll give him that. He spoke about vulnerable elders, suspicious transfers, family exclusion, emotional manipulation. He built a story in which Arthur and Eleanor were loving relatives pushed away by a resentful grandson who had embedded himself in Edith's home and distorted her judgment. It was a performance for anyone unfamiliar with the actual records. He implied I had isolated her. He implied she lacked capacity. He implied certain seed assets belonged morally, if not legally, to the broader family line. He implied urgency, risk, hidden misconduct, and the need to freeze distributions before further damage occurred. I sat still and let him spend himself. One advantage of growing up around controlling people is that you learn something most people never do: volume is often camouflage. When he finished, the judge turned to Sterling. Sterling stood, adjusted his glasses, and in a voice so dry it almost qualified as mercy, said, "Your Honor, the record will show that nearly every material assertion just made by opposing counsel is false." Then he began. Competency evaluations. Signed and witnessed trust amendments. Financial ledgers. Deposit histories. Documented intent. Independent counsel. Separate asset origin. He moved carefully, almost elegantly, laying each piece down until Vance's performance began to look like what it was: a desperate attempt to blur a wall that had been built out of stone. Then came the part that changed the temperature in the room. Sterling introduced a handwritten letter Edith had left in sealed instructions for any contest that might arise. The letter was old enough that the paper had softened at the folds. Her writing was steady. He asked if I wanted to read the relevant section. The judge allowed it. I stood. There are moments when your voice belongs not just to you but to everyone who carried you to that point. I felt that when I took the paper in my hands. I read. If Arthur ever attempts to reach into this trust, let the record show that he forfeited any moral claim the night he threw Dino and that baby into the rain. What I built after that, I built because I knew love would not come from where it should. I will not reward absence and call it family. The courtroom went quiet in the way only truth can make a room quiet. My mother lowered her eyes. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Julian's face lost color. Vance shifted papers he no longer believed in. If the hearing had ended there, it still would have been enough. But greed always overreaches, and overreach creates openings. Sterling moved to fees and sanctions based on bad faith filing. To support that claim, he needed motive. Not vague motive. Specific motive. Urgent motive. Why now? Why this fast? Why this ugly? That was where Julian entered the record. Marcus's public record financial summary did not need embellishment. It was already humiliating. Failed venture. Unstable loans. Delinquent accounts. Looming bankruptcy exposure. Luxury debt completely disconnected from income reality. Sterling did not need to say, they came because they were desperate to save the golden child. The numbers said it for him. Still, he did say one line I enjoyed more than I should have. He looked at the judge and said, "The timing suggests the plaintiffs became interested in fairness only after discovering that Mr. D'Amico was no longer visibly struggling." That was courtroom language for exactly what had happened. They saw the house. They saw the Porsche. They saw proof that the son they discarded had built a life. And instead of feeling shame, they smelled opportunity. My father finally couldn't contain himself. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering too harshly. My mother put a hand on Julian's forearm and he shook it off. The gesture was small, but it told the whole story. Their family image only works while no one panics. Under pressure, their love fragments instantly into blame. The judge noticed. Judges notice everything. When he ruled, he did not waste time. The trust stood. The challenge failed. The emergency relief was denied. The filings, in light of the documentation and motive evidence, approached bad faith. Sanctions and attorney fees would be awarded. It was not cinematic. It was better. It was precise. My father closed his eyes at the fee ruling like a man struck somewhere internal. Julian swore under his breath. My mother looked as if she had finally understood what public embarrassment actually costs when it lands on your own name instead of someone else's. I did not feel joy. That surprises people when I say it out loud, but it's true. I felt release. Joy is bright. Release is lighter than that. Quieter. Less dramatic. Like setting down weight you forgot was fused to your skeleton. The hearing ended. Papers closed. Chairs moved. Voices lowered. Life in the courthouse resumed around us as if 20 years had not just folded in on themselves in one room. Noah and I walked out first. We were halfway down the corridor when I heard my father call my name. I kept walking for 3 more steps before stopping. Not because I wanted to hear him. Because for once, I wanted him to feel the distance before I turned. When I did face him, he was already close enough that I could see the sweat near his temples. He looked smaller than he used to. Not physically. Structurally. People like Arthur build themselves out of certainty. Strip the certainty, and the person looks less solid. He tried to speak with authority at first. It failed. So he changed tactics. He said this had gotten out of hand. He said families say terrible things under stress. He said there had been misunderstandings. He said perhaps we could still work something out before everyone suffers. That line almost made me laugh again. Everyone. Not me, though. He had never counted me inside everyone. Then came the real request. Julian needed help. Just temporary help. Just enough to stop a filing. Just enough to prevent total damage. Just enough to keep this from becoming irreversible. I looked at my brother. He could not meet my eyes. That was the final humiliation, not the money, not the courtroom, not the ruling. The final humiliation was this: the family that had once thrown me out with a child in my arms was now standing in a public hallway asking that same child, now a man, to help rescue the brother they had chosen over him. My father lowered his voice. "He's your brother." And there it was. The oldest weapon in bad families. Blood used as a debt collector. I thought about the rain. I thought about the deadbolt. I thought about Noah asleep under hospital blankets. I thought about Edith assembling a crib with arthritic hands. I thought about every holiday they skipped, every silence they maintained, every year they let Noah grow without a single expression of interest. Then I thought about the photo. A house. A Porsche. A visible life. That was what had brought them back. Not love. Not regret. Visibility. I said, "You didn't come looking for a son. You came looking for assets." He flinched. Good. My mother had come up behind him by then. Her face was strained in a way I had never seen before, because strain and embarrassment had finally turned inward. She tried a different approach. Softer. Trembling voice. A mother's shape wrapped around a stranger's intent. "Dino," she said, "whatever happened before, we can't change it. But we can decide what kind of family we are now." That was the moment any remaining softness in me went still. Because only certain people get to use that sentence. People who stayed. People who tried. People who failed and came back with humility. Not people who locked doors and then reopened them when money appeared in the driveway. I looked at her and said, "You already decided what kind of family you were. 20 years ago." She started crying then. Maybe real tears. Maybe not. It no longer mattered. My father's face hardened again, because shame almost always tries one last transformation back into anger before it collapses. "You'd let your own brother drown." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You did that. The same way you tried to drown me. The difference is, somebody opened the door for me." That landed. Because Edith was the one witness they could not argue with anymore. Dead, but still defeating them. Noah had said nothing this whole time. He didn't need to. His presence was the argument. Healthy. Educated. Dignified. Living proof that the child they rejected had not become the disaster they predicted but something infinitely worse for them, a decent man. My father took one more step toward me. "So that's it?" I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time without wanting anything from him. There is a strange freedom in no longer hoping someone will become who they should have been. It empties the room of bargaining. That's it, I said. Then I added the only line that mattered. You forgot I existed until you saw something you wanted. He opened his mouth, but there was nothing left worth hearing. Noah and I turned and walked away. Outside, the day was bright and almost offensively normal. Cars moved. People crossed streets. Somewhere nearby somebody was laughing into a phone. The world had not paused for my family's collapse, and I loved it for that. There is mercy in learning that the universe does not need to rearrange itself for justice to count. We drove back to Edith's house. I still think of it as Edith's house, though legally and practically it had become ours. Some places keep the name of the person who taught them how to be home. We went inside and the quiet met us gently. That house had a different kind of silence than my parents' house ever did. Their silence had always felt judgmental, waiting for the next wrong note. Edith's silence felt inhabited. Restful. Like the walls had learned compassion by listening. I went to the kitchen without speaking. The scratched wooden table was still there. Same marks. Same slight wobble in one leg if you leaned too hard on the corner. I set my keys down and stood with both hands on the chair Edith used to sit in. Noah went upstairs to change. I filled the kettle. That sound, water rushing into metal, is one of the sounds my life is built on. Rain hitting the porch. A baby breathing in sleep. A kettle beginning to warm. The click of a deadbolt. The softer click of a door opening after that. When the kettle boiled, I made 2 cups of tea out of habit. One for me. One for the place across the table. Noah came back down in a t-shirt and found me sitting there looking at the steam rise. He did not ask why there were 2 mugs. He sat beside me and rested his forearms on the table the same way I used to. After a long silence, he said, "Are you okay?" It was such a simple question that it almost undid me. Because nobody had asked me that on the night everything started. Not Sarah. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Julian. Edith had not asked it either, but she had answered it with action. That was even better. I thought about the hearing. The hallway. The photo. The years. Then I said the truest thing I could. I think I'm finally finished carrying them. Noah nodded slowly. A few days after that, he showed me a proposal he had drafted for the scholarship fund. He wanted to make it official, structured, practical. Not a vanity memorial. Something real. Tuition assistance for single young parents trying to continue school. Small awards. Clear eligibility. Private application review so nobody had to perform humiliation to receive help. At the top of the page he had written, Edith Grant for young parents. I read it once. Then again. And for the first time since the courthouse, I cried. Not because of my parents. Not because of the money. Because this was the true ending of the story. Not the lawsuit. Not the sanctions. Not the begging in the hallway. The true ending was this: the love that saved me did not stop with me. It moved forward. Into Noah. Into choices. Into generosity. Into structure. Into somebody else's future. That is how you know evil failed. Not when the cruel people lose. When the cruelty does not reproduce itself in you. Months passed. Julian filed bankruptcy anyway. My parents sold things quietly. Cut memberships. Changed patterns. Their social circle shrank the way circles always shrink when money and image stop arriving in matching outfits. I heard pieces of it through relatives, though I never asked. Melissa, to her credit, stopped sending updates once she realized I didn't want gossip as dessert. I had no appetite for it. One evening, late in autumn, I came home after work and found Noah on the porch with a cardboard box beside him. "What's that?" I asked. He lifted the lid. Inside was Edith's gray blanket. He had taken it to be cleaned and repaired at the edges because one corner was nearly giving out. He held it with both hands like something ceremonial. "I didn't want it to fall apart," he said. That blanket had covered me through some of the hardest nights of my life. Law school. Bills. Fear. Doubt. Grief. It had become so ordinary in my memory that I had forgotten its shape until I saw it folded there in the box. I took it inside. That night I sat at the kitchen table longer than I meant to. Old habit. Case file open. Glasses off. Tea cooling near my elbow. Somewhere around midnight I must have fallen asleep there because when I woke, the house was dark and still. And the blanket was over my shoulders. For one disoriented second, the old reflex hit me so hard it hurt. My body expected Edith in the next room. Then I turned and saw Noah asleep on the couch with a lamp still on beside him. He had done it. Quietly. Without making a moment out of it. Without standing over me waiting for gratitude. He had simply seen someone he loved asleep at a table and made sure that person was warm. That was when I understood the full size of what Edith had left us. Not the trust. Not the house. Not even security. She left us a pattern. Open the door. Keep the food warm. Buy the crib. Cover the tired person with the blanket. Protect the child. Tell the truth. Do not confuse blood with loyalty. Do not confuse money with worth. Do not confuse silence with peace. That is inheritance. Real inheritance. Sometimes people ask whether I ever regretted refusing my parents when they asked for help. No. And it is important to say that cleanly, because people are very uncomfortable when you refuse to romanticize family after family has done something unforgivable. I do not regret it because mercy without accountability is just surrender dressed in holy language. I do not regret it because helping them would not have healed the past. It would only have rewarded their belief that access to me could be restored whenever they needed something. I do not regret it because my duty was never to rescue the people who harmed me at the expense of the people who built me. My duty was to protect the life that had been fought for. Mine. Noah's. Edith's legacy. And I did. Sometimes I still think about that photo. A cousin smiling. A driveway in the background. A car. A house. Such ordinary things. But ordinary things become explosive when they expose a lie. My parents told themselves a story for 20 years. That I would fail. That I would come crawling back. That throwing me out had been harsh but necessary. That I had made my choice and they had made theirs and life had surely proven them right. Then one image destroyed the entire myth.